The title of my presentation is Transformative Teacher Development Activities, and I hope you find it interesting and useful. I think it's useful for teachers and teacher trainers alike, and anybody thinking of developing professionally. I think they can adapt the ideas. But of course, this is about English language teaching and learning. The plan is to start talking about CPD activities. To make sure that we are on the same page. CPD, that stands for Continuous Professional Development. We'll talk briefly about that. Then we'll talk again very briefly about feelings about CPD, about Continuous Professional Development activities. After that, most of my presentation, the main part of my presentation, focuses on effective CPD, and it's based on an article written by Silvana Richardson and Díaz Maggioli on effective CPD. I'll give you the hyperlink, the link, in case you want to download it and read it. And then if we put into practice the suggestions for effective CPD, I think we can end up with transformative teacher development activities. That is, teacher development activities that will have an impact on your teaching and will enhance your students' learning. So that's the plan for the next 15 minutes. But let's start by looking at the concept of continuous professional development. The pictures that you can see there, they show some of the different ways in which we can develop professionally. And I'd like you to use the chat box to say what kind of activities they try to illustrate. Let's see if you can type in your chat box the different activities that I'm trying to show you with those pictures. They are all activities that will help us to develop professionally as teachers. Peer development, conferences, yes, exactly. Reading articles. Thank you very much. Yes, lots of ideas. Doing research, taking courses, teacher workshops. Yeah, exactly. There are lots of different ways in which we can develop professionally. Reading books, as you very well said. The picture there in the middle at the top, that's actually teaching through putting into practice ideas that we get, for example, in events like this one. We learn a lot, we develop professionally. Also, I believe that classroom observation, that picture also tries to illustrate classroom observation. I think that watching other colleagues teach or watching other trainers train teachers is one of the most enlightening experiences, because it shows teachers and teacher trainers sort of facing the same challenges that we have to face and finding a solution to them. And it also raises our self-awareness, what kind of teachers or teacher trainers we are or we are not. Personally, from my experience, I believe that classroom observation, it's one of the most enlightening experiences. But yeah, talking to other teachers in the staff room, exchanging problems, exchanging ideas, attending conferences and events like this one, those are examples of continuous professional development activities that we decide to do ourselves because we want to develop professionally. Now, what about feelings? What about your feelings about engaging in CPD activities? From my experience, I feel I've met people saying things like, I've got no time for CPD, I can't afford doing any CPD activities. But at the same time, there are people saying that, teachers saying that CPD is what keeps them alive in this very stressful profession, in which we end up using weekends to plan our lessons, to mark homework. It's essential because it sort of keeps us alive. So where do you stand? What's your take on this continuum? Can we use the chat box again? How do you feel about CPD? Is it something that you try to do regularly? You on Fridays, for example? Yeah, you need it. Yeah, it keeps you engaged with the profession. All right. Yeah, I guess that all of you find the time to do some CPD activities, to get engaged in CPD activities. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here attending this webinar. Being lifelong learners, yes, it's something that motivates us a lot. Well, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts there. Now, Of course, I mean, deciding what to do, it's a difficult decision to take, because it depends on how much time we've got available. It depends on whether there's a fee involved or not. That small boy there sweating, that's illustrating whether we like to be assessed or not. Personally, that's something that I like very much. I try to get involved in activities, courses, for example, where I am assessed, because getting a colleague's opinion on my work, I believe that's something that can help me to grow professionally. So all these things are things that we need to take into account when deciding what is cost effective in our situation and what we are going to do, deciding what we're going to do for professional development purposes. Now, as I said before, this presentation is based on the work of Silvana Richardson and Gabriel Díaz Maggioli. And they say that thanks to the insights provided by large-scale international research studies, we now know that teachers' CPD programs only lead to powerful and transferable learning outcomes if they are designed in a certain way, right? And this is the way, according to these authors, in which CPD, professional development initiatives, need to be designed. These are 7 characteristics that will lead to effective professional development, and we're going to look at each of them one by one, right? I think that's the acronym. It's very clever, right? Inspire, to inspire teachers to develop professionally. I love that. So the first letter in the acronym, the I, that stands for impactful. And Silvana Richardson and Gabriel Díaz Maggioli, they say that the main goal of CPD is to effect changes in teaching so that it results in enhanced students' learning, right? And that's something that I think I couldn't agree more. Can we speak of professional development if there is no impact on our students' learning? I guess that's something controversial, and it could be the focus of a different presentation. But if you ask me, I think that for professional development to be development, it needs to find a way to the classroom, and it needs to impact on our students' learning, hopefully positively, right? So the question that you need to ask yourself when you're thinking of what CPD activities to do, I think the first question that you need to ask yourselves is, how can I enhance my students' learning? And that may come from different sources. It may come from your students' feedback that may show you how you can enhance the learning. It may come from the results of formative or summative assessment. It may come from CPD initiatives like this one, like the New Voices event organized by Macmillan Education. But let me give you an example. In my case, it was interesting to see in the previous presentation the way that students felt about using artificial intelligence. I feel that we can certainly enhance students' learning through artificial intelligence. Much of what I have seen in connection with artificial intelligence has to do with how to make our job easier. I mean, teachers' job easier by designing materials, creating activities, even assessing students. But I think that the real challenge with artificial intelligence is how to make use of artificial intelligence, how to motivate our students to use artificial intelligence to become independent learners, more autonomous. They've got a tutor 24/7 by their side. So how can we motivate them to use artificial intelligence critically in order to learn better? I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we're facing in education at the moment. So the first question, as I said before, to have an impact on my students' learning, in the case of my experience, my personal experience, I thought of, well, I can certainly have an impact on my students' learning through artificial intelligence. I'm going to try and use this example throughout the acronym, throughout the different letters that we're going to see in Silvana Richardson and Gabriel Díaz's work, right? The second letter that stands for needs-based. Programs are impactful when they address the diverse needs of teachers and the learners. And I think the question you need to ask yourselves is, what are my learning needs, right? Once you have decided how you're going to enhance your students' learning, what kind of impact you want to have on your learners, you need to think of, well, what are my learning needs? What do I need to improve? What knowledge do I need, or what skills do I need in order to have the impact that I want to have on my learners? And again, your learning needs may come from different sources, from your students' needs, from your students' feedback, appraisal meetings that you may have with your with your supervisors, and they may show you some aspects of your teaching that can improve. Events like this one, conferences, books that you might read, blogs that you might read, that may show you what your learning needs are. In the case of my example of artificial intelligence, it was very easy for me to decide what my learning needs were because I knew next to nothing about artificial intelligence. All I knew was, typing a few questions on ChatGPT to see what it was like. So I was starting from scratch, and it was easy to decide, okay, I need to start from scratch and learn about artificial intelligence to have an impact on my students' learning. The next letter, I think this is very important in the acronym that stands for sustained over time. For a CPD program to be impactful, it needs to be prolonged. That's what Silvana Richardson and Gabriel Díaz Maggioli say, right? One-off events like this event that we're attending today, they are great, but what do we do about them? Because if we just save, a few screenshots or make a few notes in our notebooks and that we keep that in a drawer in the office, is that professional development? So the questions that you need to ask yourself to make it prolonged, I believe, are questions like, what am I going to do? Right? And that's your homework for this weekend after attending New Voices. What are you going to do as a result of attending these New Voices conferences? And when are you going to do it? If you think of what you're going to do and when you're going to do it, and you start writing it in your calendar, in that way, you will prolong your effort. You will sustain your effort over time, and you will have an impact on your students' learning. Something else that it's important to ask yourselves is how you're going to keep track of your progress. I believe that's important so that you can achieve your objectives. And it's important to set smart objectives, being objectives that are specific, that are measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, right? If you ask yourself these 3 questions after the New Voices event, you will be able to plan your teaching and have an impact on your students' learning, hopefully to enhance your students' learning. The next letter in the acronym that stands for peer collaboration. Peer collaboration has been reported to be amongst the highest indicators of effectiveness in CPD. So the questions that you need to ask yourself is, well, who can I share my work with? Who can I involve in what I'm doing? And if you share what you're doing with other teachers in the classroom, I'm sure that you're going to find somebody who is also worried about the same things that you are, and you can find a partner and work together and achieve effective professional development according to what Richardson and Gabriel Díaz Maggioli say, right? The second I in the acronym, that stands for in practice. And I talked about that in a certain way at the very beginning of the presentation. We need a classroom-based focus on teaching practice, teachers learning through doing, tackling real issues and developing practical solutions. Because as I said at the very beginning, if we don't take this learning to the classroom, what's the point of doing all this? Is it really professional development if it doesn't reach the classroom? So the next question that you have to ask yourself is, well, what activities do I need to implement? What activities am I going to implement for my students in the classroom or online learning if you're teaching remotely? The next letter in the acronym, that stands for reflective, the R. Of course, we need to reflect critically and systematically on our practice and improve it as a result. And of course, there are lots of different things we can reflect on. I believe that these 2 questions, they will help you to reflect on the key things that we need to reflect when we are trying to develop professionally. How can I make my students' learning and my own learning visible? Maybe you're probably familiar with John Hattie's work on visible learning. If we think of trying to make our own learning and our students' learning visible, that will help us with the last letter in the acronym that we're going to see now in a few seconds. The second question that you need to ask yourselves is, do I need to gather any information? And if so, how am I going to collect that information to make my students' learning visible and to make my own learning visible? These are key questions, I believe, and that we must reflect on this when we are teaching or when we're training teachers as well. And this is linked to the last letter in the acronym, evaluative. one of our most fundamental tasks, according to Richardson and Díaz Maggioli, and also John Hattie, is that we must become evaluators of our own impact. We need to find out what my students have learned, right? What have my students learned? What have I learned from this experience? What criteria will I use to assess the learning outcomes? Those are three key questions that will help you to evaluate the impact of your teaching. And of course, they are connected with the reflection that I mentioned before. Rounding it off, there you can see this fantastic acronym, this very clever acronym that Silvana Richardson and Gabriel Díaz Maggioli came up with, and some questions that I believe can help you to actually have an impact on your students. Because as I said before, if all these ideas that we get in this New Voices event, for example, end up in our computers or in our notebooks and they don't reach the classroom and we don't enhance our students' learning, then I believe, and you're free to disagree, of course, that it's not really professional development. So professional development is about what we do. It's about what we learn, the knowledge that we gain, the skills that we develop, but what we do with them in our classrooms with our students to enhance learning. That's at least the way that I see it. I'll share the slides with you now in a few seconds. In that hyperlink, from that hyperlink, you can download the paper that I mentioned. And some of the pictures were I downloaded them from Canva, and some of the other pictures I generated them using GenCraft, an AI tool that I really recommend. It works beautifully and it's very, very simple to use.